Okay, next up we have Richard Kellerman, who will talk to us about weather. And I know I've been acquainted with Richard for a while, and
yeah, the mic is off. Are you looking for your bag? Maybe the battery's missing.
Are you looking for your bag?
Yeah, try to take the battery out and back in. It's usually the battery that's missealed.
after lunch I'm going to just get it to run another bite.
Nope, good.
Alrighty, so, you know, Richard is known to a lot of our folks around here as one of our big weather guys. You know, you'll see Quebec Victor and he'll come up with this wonderful forecast on a nice Governor's Cup kind of day, and then him and Eric go and basically confer, and you know, he does just an outstanding job. I met Richard at, I believe at the Mifflin contest a couple years back, and well, and what I wanted to say about that is, you know, I've landed out I think about 51 times, and I've met a lot of farmers and a lot of people have crewed for me, but of the people that crewed for me, very few have crewed twice. And Richard actually retrieved me twice in that competition. He has the distinction of retrieving me more than once. But
he's just protecting his weather forecast.
Indeed, indeed. But in any case, Richard, you know, he's also quite an accomplished ridge pilot, and he has flown many ridge missions, and well over 1,000 K at least once. And he really is going to share with us his expertise on weather. And so please give a round of applause for Richard, and let's get started.
Well, Colin is hard to follow in the air and hard to follow at the speaker's podium. He's actually a much more accomplished ridge pilot than I'll ever be. And he's not a bad weatherman either. I like to tell the story of one Mifflin contest where I already put at least a couple of hours into the forecast. And Carl comes breezing in and he says, well, UNV TAP says 5,000 feet scattered, let's go. What I hope to do today is to convince you that you need more than just the wind speed and direction, that there's more to a weather forecast than a TAF, and it's both worthwhile and interesting to put some effort into it. I can't possibly, in the time available, go into the step-by-step details of how you make a forecast, but I do want to show you some of the tools I use and get you turned on to maybe learning to use them yourself. So, the talk is entitled Run or Walk Away. Run as in run the ridge, walk away as in don't do it. It's just not going to be safe. Carl finished on the Dale Kramer disaster. I'll start on it. To me, that was a classic day you walk away from. And I think Carl had made the same decision. And I'm not surprised Dale didn't. I was appalled that John did. But fortunately, nobody was killed, but Dale was badly injured and is in a lot of pain still. The winds that day. Am I on or not? Yeah, just do. I can't tell.
There you go.
Okay. No. Okay. All right. The winds that day were forecast within the boundary layer, the mixed layer, were forecast to be reaching 60 knots. They weren't 60 knots at ridge height, but as I will show you later on, they easily could have been. Not only that, the forecast called for ceilings of 4,000 feet, and Dale was going into an area where the terrain was above that. So I'd have walked away from that one. When I do the CDing, which I occasionally do, I like to point out to the competitors that we're not playing Russian roulette. There you control nothing, it's just luck. You control everything as the pilot. When you see stuff in red italics, it means it's safety related, and it'll come up a few times during the talk. Everybody knows this. I hate to quote the FARs to you, but the FAA got this one right. And amongst the many things you should know is the weather. So this is the era of blip maps, sky sight, XE skies, windy, beautiful sights, wonderful, sexy presentations, and there's some real question about, you know, what do you need people like me for? And, well, it's not trivial to answer that. These things are pretty damn good. But you can, in fact, look deeper beyond the numerical models and slick graphics. You can also use the slick graphics to convince yourself that no two forecasts are the same. And under those conditions, they can't both be right. They, in fact, could all be wrong. So, maybe I can convince you that you do need a weatherman. Now, ridge forecasting is a little different. Nobody on a serious ridge mission is going to be weather forecasting at 8 o'clock in the morning. They're going to be 200 miles on course. So a lot of what I do for a ridge mission has to be done the night before. These are all hyperlinks. You don't have to copy them down. I'll give you an XLSX version of this that you can run as a PPT, or you can run if you use Google Docs. I'll just share it with you. But you don't need every one of these. These are the tools I use, and you can read them for yourself. And you may be familiar with some of them, perhaps not all of them. This one labeled LAMP is a neat tool. I'll show you that later on. I think many of you probably use the ESL GSD tool here. I put it in print because I don't make much use of it. I also use something called BuffKit, which I will demonstrate to you. It's a very fast and easy way of comparing multiple soundings. It's a National Weather Service product. Some of you may have heard of Aero. This is a very powerful tool to analyze soundings. Almost all of the work I do on forecasts is based on soundings. I'd like to show you an amusing video.
Excuse me.
Hello?
Hello? Question from question.
Yeah.
Turn the hearing say.
Okay, it's working, right?
No, there was a question, Richard.
Ah.
The batteries in your hearing aid may not be working.
Hey, Richard,
Yeah.
could you explain what soundings are and what boundary layer are?
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm glad you asked that. No, it's a perfectly reasonable question. There's two kinds of soundings. One's made by a balloon, which is released at 7 o'clock in the morning all around the world, many of them. And as it goes up, it measures the temperature, dew point, wind, speed, and direction, and transmits them back, and that's called a sounding. There's another kind of sounding, which is not a measurement at all. It's done by numerical models, and produces something that looks a little bit like the actual data. So.
And you mentioned boundary layer. I'm not sure what that is.
Okay, so it's a fancy name for the highest you can get to on a given day is the top of the boundary layer. It's called the mixed layer, the boundary layer, the planetary boundary layer. It's got lots of names, but it's just it's that part of the air that we saw in. It's not.
On a
What's the
thermal,
lower
it would still
level
go
of that
above
level?
and
I found this quite amusing. I was going to show you. Damn, I wish that wouldn't happen. Hang on. All right, sorry about that. I also use something I call a cloud-based calculator. It's a simple spreadsheet I wrote that you can use to double check on the projected cloud base. That's often one of the things that the fancy models get wrong. I have my own way of doing it, which is simple, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so the good ridge day you can see coming from a long way out. That was a week before the day. It was 2 weeks ago. I think some of you flew on Monday the 16th it was. 7 days before that, you can see this monster low setting up, and you can see the isobars across the state of Pennsylvania. That's almost perfect for a ridge day. If there's 4 of them, it's going to be too windy. If there's less than 3, it won't be windy enough. You can also see there's some sort of trough action to the north. I think that actually caused trouble eventually. But this was, you know, a long time out, and you can get started in planning for a ridge mission by simply tracking the surface analysis charts, and I'll show you that where they are in a minute. So, when I do a forecast, I do it in multiple steps. The first thing is it's critical that you have to know what's going on before you start forecasting what's going to happen. And well, that's the surface analysis chart. That's the weather prediction center that I referred to earlier on. That's the best place to get your surface analysis charts. That's the current one right now. I'm sorry that this is proving troublesome here. The next thing I look at is the forecast discussion. This is another National Weather Service product, and it's a you don't need to read this now. You do need to read it when you're doing your forecast. But again, I've given you links to it so you can find it. What this discussion does is it refers to the current weather situation and places the best professional interpretation on how things are shaping up. It'll often say which model's working better, and given that there's about 30 models, that's kind of useful information.
Richard,
Yes, go ahead.
What does BuffKit stand for, and what does ROAC stand for, and how are they both different in what they measure? Thank you, sir.
What does bucket do? And what is it?
Yeah, okay, so the question suggests that I'm talking at the wrong level here. So, does anybody, who doesn't know what a rail sounding is? I mean, most of you.
What does it stand for?
You're familiar with balloon soundings, right?
Well, what is the initials?
Oh,
Radar, something? That's what we should ask.
Radio.
radio, observation.
Aerial, yeah, that's it. That sounds
Yeah.
good. Radio.
It's the one piece of data we actually have. We've got all these fantastic numerical models that model the atmosphere from the surface of the stratosphere, but there's only one piece of data. You get it twice a day at about, I think, less than 100 sites in the nation. And that's when they release a balloon, and they actually measure it. But other than that, everything's done. So that's rail. And what was the other part of the question?
What does BuffKit stand for?
Oh, BuffKit, I'll come to that later.
Thank you, sir.
So,
My apologies.
Good question.
was there another question?
No, sir.
Okay. I check the satellite imagery to see what's happening, and I check MESARs, and you should all do that. So that's the synoptic part of the forecast. The next part is actually making the forecast itself. These are the steps that I go through, and I'll spend a little more time on them later, but first of all, I look at the soundings that are relevant to the flight. On a ridge flight, they're going to be all the, wherever we happen to be going on the ridge, I'll look at as many as I need to. Having done that, I'll work with SkySight. Does everybody know what SkySight is? You do. Anybody not know what SkySight is? Okay, great, excellent. Well, I highly recommend it to the two of you who don't know it. You do have to pay for it, but it's worth it. I also use XC Skies. Everybody use that too. So, yeah, it's going to be pretty annoying to subscribe to. There's a great site called Windy. I don't know if you know that, but I highly recommend that too. I still use bitmaps, Dr. Jack, the original, and I make my own independent cloud-based estimate. Okay, so how do I do all these things? Actually, the final step is validation. There are several things that you can actually check against the forecast well before you actually start the mission, and everything I can check, I do. I check the temperature against what was forecast, the dew point, wind speed and direction, and the more they agree with the forecast, the more comfortable I am. Okay, so the ancients dealt with 4 elements. I'll make this simple now. Earth, air, fire, and water. We are too. We're dealing with ridges, wind, thermals, and clouds as water. So, let's go through these one at a time. Here's the ridge in symbolic form. It really consists of 3 bits. From Williamsport to Altoona. At Altoona it makes a pretty abrupt swing to the south, and then it comes back up again all the way down to Knoxville. A somewhat similar thing happens on the Tuscarora, as all the ACA people will know. So that means that any one direction of wind isn't ideal. The one that's important is as you start to get westerly, things can get ugly both in the northern end of the ridge and at the southern end. When you've got the wind behind you and it's a poor angle, it's not too bad, but you won't be happy when the wind angle is bad and you're flying into it. You know, transitions, gaps, any weak spots will be very trying. So it's helpful to bear in mind that the Earth itself is changing as we fly. Wind is the critical thing for a ridge mission. I used to live in Media, and there was a church behind me that had one of these things on the top of the steeple, and it must have weighed a ton, because I never saw it moving. No, but it did. And any time it was pointing in the northwest quadrant, and the sun was out, I went flying. And my weather forecasts have only gotten worse since then. It's remarkably reliable. Okay, so what do we want in a wind forecast? Well, obviously the strength and direction. And the first place we want it is at the top of the ridge. And I put that in red italics, it's a safety issue. So how strong can the ridge wind be before I'm not comfortable? I'll tell you the answer is 30 knots. If it's more than that, I'm going to think twice about flying. My experience has been that it's rougher than hell, that any kind of transitions and upwind progress are difficult because it's even stronger aloft. So if you see 30 knots in your ridge forecast, think twice. We obviously need to know it at the surface. I haven't put that in red because usually the tow pilot will save us from our own stupidity. I was in Mifflin once and the CD called the day and the tow pilot said, well, we're not towing. So I also look at the wind. This is a red flag area too. This is the Dale Kramer problem. So the mixed layer, again, to emphasize it, you asked this, that's the convective layer. How high up can you climb, basically? And if the wind, anytime, it's called a mixed layer for a reason. If the wind is 60 knots at the top of it, it can get mixed down to any level, and you can get gusts like that. So if I see gusts above 40 at the top, anywhere in the mixed layer, I'm already worried. I'll have a bit more to say about that later on. Obviously, you need to know when it's going to start and end. And when I say maximum range, you want to know how far down it goes. I don't know whether you remember the chart I showed with that big low. It was obvious that that was not going to be a really long ridge day. There weren't the isobars south of Mount Roanoke or even that far. You want a wave forecast. I'm not going to say a lot about them. The only way I know to forecast wave is to go to SkySight and use their wave tool. I think it works quite well. So how do you get this stuff? Well, there's a matrix of what we want to get. We want the surface, ridge, mixed layer height. How many days in advance can we get the information? And how far can we fly? Well, Windy will do almost everything for us, up to 9 days out, which is remarkable. One of the really great things about Windy is it's the only way to get the output of the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting model, which is generally considered to be the best model. So I definitely use Windy. I'm not going to give a demonstration of Windy right now. I think it'll simply take too long, but highly recommended site. Go and play with it and do use it. I do want to show you something for TAFs that can be helpful to you. Let me. Those are the station, that's the ridge, you presumably can recognize it, and each one of those pins is a TAF METAR site. They're pretty much where you want them, and each one of them I've set up so that there's well, you just saw it. Sorry, I can't do it. And it'll just take you straight to. So I'll send you all a KML file that will allow you to do that, and you can, within seconds, you can get the TAFs and METARs for all the sites along the ridge, from Tennessee to Williamsport, which is a nice thing to be able to do.
So is the ridge working?
Well, I think
Not towing.
3 miles and light snow showers.
Okay, so let's deal with the thermal part of it first. You don't need one of these, but you do need some sun on the ground. There's 2 kinds of thermal forecasts we're interested in. Obviously, you look at the maps, that's what you all do, those of you who use SkySight, XE Skies, and Blip Maps. I do the same thing. I'm looking for how high you can soar, how strong, and how deep is the mixed layer. The reason I care about the mixed layer will be clear later on when I talk about cumulus clouds, but it has a lot to do with whether we will or won't get cumulus. I also do point forecasts. I look, by the nature of a skew-T plot, you can only do 1 point at a time, but all these sites make it possible to look at soundings. So of the SkySight users, how many of you regularly use the sounding tool in it? Yeah, well, good for you. I recommend it to all of you. Let's just take a minute here. No, that's okay. That's deliberate. You can. SkySight does Namibia as well as. And I picked Namibia because the soaring weather's better there.
It's a dream.
So
That's
yeah.
right.
So if you look here, Matthew offers you the skew-T option. Simply put the click on it, and it will generate a sounding. Maybe. There we are. So, and he can do that. It's really slick. Now, I don't have the time to tell you how to interpret that, but to me that tells me a lot. And anybody who, how many of you use the FSL GSD site that I referred to? You do. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you do. But that's most of the audience doesn't.
What's the moving dash line thing?
Which one?
The moving dash line?
Oh, this, you mean the gray line here?
No, the dash is.
The animated portion.
Don't forget the mic.
Oh, it's just that's the temperature.
Virtual. I think it's the virtual. They're dashed.
I mean, I could spend the rest of the day talking about these things, but it's pointless. All I want to do is to show you that where to get them and exist. You then, if you're interested enough, it's easy to learn how to use these. I have a seminar on the SSA website on how to interpret these diagrams, and I've given a reference to that as well. Okay, I want to say a little bit about thermaling before we move on. It's in red and it's italics, and here's why. When you thermal on a ridge day, you're necessarily low, because you wouldn't be thermaling otherwise. It's turbulent, and the terrain is almost invariably hostile. You're dealing with ground speed distractions. To think back to when you last thermal close to the ground on a ridge and the wind's really blowing, as you go downwind towards the ridge, it seems like you're going like hell. What about your airspeed?
This is one of my favorite topics.
Well, my 29 ES at 10 pounds per square foot, flap 6, stalls at 40 knots, all right? In a 45-degree bank, that's 48 knots stall speed, 20% greater. Let's have a 30-knot gust, which is totally plausible. Add 10 knots now, because assume the steady wind is 20 knots. So a 30-knot gust means there's a 10-knot abrupt slip. So to deal with that 10-knot gust, which is not a particularly big gust, you need to be thermaling at 60 knots. Now, 10 PSF is probably heavier than most of you fly, but it's by no means as heavy as you can get. It's easy to get some of our gliders up to 12 pounds per square foot. Do that, and you're looking probably at thermaling at no less than 65 to 70 knots. So be careful out there, and if you've done a lot of flying dry, and you suddenly decide it's time to move to water, which is great, just be careful when you're thermaling. Do me a favor and thermal really fast. When you're 1,000 feet above the ridge, do what you like. Actually, even that's not safe, because a modern 18-meter glider full of water, when it stalls, is probably more than I'd want to handle. Or it spins, rather. Here's another thing. Carl alluded to this, and I want to, this is a nice picture. You don't need a pulsing fixed thermal source, but this is a typical setup on a ridge. When there's a wind gradient, which there almost invariably is, the thermals actually slope. As you circle under it, there's a tendency to drop out on the downwind side. So when you are climbing off the ridge, you're almost certainly going to be making an upwind correction on every turn. And I think Carl actually referred to that. Water, that's the way we like to see it. Again, the pilots always want to know whether there will be Q, if so when, how high, how many of them. How many isn't so easy. The people who write the TAFs will say few, scattered, or broken. I've never been quite certain how they come up with that, but they tend to be right. I put precip in red because, as Carl mentioned, that's an issue with visibility mostly. Rain has a pretty bad effect on your glider's performance. Strato Q is problematical. That's forecastable. Cirrus is seldom going to be a problem on a ridge day. It's just, you know. But now we use basically the same tools again to get all this data. It's all provided by SkySat and XC Skies, and it's pretty straightforward. I do the same thing at various points in the contest area or task. I do an independent calculation of cloud base. Let me show you that, and you can all do this. It's a simple spreadsheet.
And the input is the forecast temperature, the forecast surface dew point, and the height of the next layer. And once it knows those things, it'll calculate the cloud base for you. It usually does a better job than picking cloud base on any of the maps. And that's because this technique gives me complete control over what the surface dew point and temperature actually are going to be. With Matthew's site, the sky site, you have to take what he gives you. You can't experiment with it. I found this to be a much more reliable way of doing it, and it's extremely simple. Let's go back and I'll show you how I get the data.
Is this your own spreadsheet you made up? Yeah, right. And you can all have it. It's There's the reason I hate touchpads. So there's the data that the NWS kindly surprise you. They do a pretty good job of getting the surface temperature and dew point forecast correctly. And once you know those two things, you can calculate cloud base. It's simple. And that's what that spreadsheet does for you.
It doesn't depend on humidity?
Well, that's the dew point.
Yeah, so isn't that hard to forecast exactly?
The dew point is in fact hard to forecast, yes. So, and it's usually wrong. And it's the primary source of errors in not just the height of cloud base, but whether the damn things will be there or not. But I will show you that there are ways to check on that. We're coming to that right now. That's the validation part of the forecast. So when we come to validation, I reread the discussions. I know a lot more about the weather system now. I know what my forecast is. I reread what the experts have to say about the weather. There's another site which you have a link to here, which discusses how the models are performing. That's extremely useful information. Sometimes they're all the same, sometimes they're all different. The professionals will suggest which one's doing a better job. I read the METARs because they tell me what the wind speed and direction are, and that was one of the things I forecast. This, I'll try to show you this because it's a very neat site. Ah, there it is. Hang on. So this is a specific aviation product. You can select what you want to see, and I'll just leave the selections as they are up here. But what it does is really neat. This is the forecast line, and then it starts plotting what the observation is. And it'll do that for hours. You can set it up, well before the day, and you can see for any number of parameters how things are evolving. So it's a very useful site.
What's MLS mean?
What's what?
MLS.
Model output statistics. I also, those of you, you can also check the ATIS, ASOS, and AWOS reports and satellite imagery. Somebody asked me about getting the surface dew points right. One of the things that I do regularly is go to a site that shows me at least what they are now.
It's taking its time loading. Here we are. This one is animatable, and I can do that, but if that shows a serious disparity between the forecast dew points and what it actually is now, then I've got a good warning.
Yeah, I think unfortunately it's... Okay, so
I'm going to do one more thing and then we're going to stop. This is the flight I did a few years ago, and the flight was from Carl's Place down to Tazewell to Charlottesville and back home. It was, although it was a legal triangle, it's very much a ridge flight, as you can see. We exploited the rules to the limit at the Tazewell end. We didn't get anywhere near the turn point, but because you could use the quadrant, you can get basically free distance, which we did. The only slightly difficult part of the flight was this bit, and even that wasn't too hard. So what kind of weather did we have, and would you like to see? Well, that was the surface analysis. It just doesn't get any better than that. When I saw that, I thought we were probably on. We wanted to look at wind. Windgram is extremely useful. Notice that it satisfies all my criteria. It's not particularly strong, but it's strong enough. Even as you go up in the atmosphere, it's 35 knots even at 6,000 feet. So that was pretty good. We looked at the wind at Tazewell, and there's just enough wind to make it work. It's like typically the ridge weakens as you get further south and the gradient decreases. But today it looked good enough, and it was. Oh, damn. How can that be?
Keep going. Keep going.
You dragged it down there.
You accidentally moved it before.
Yeah, but we're going backwards. Ah, good. So, the other thing I wanted to know, now, I'm sorry that people don't all know about soundings. Can everybody look at that and know it's a pretty good thermal day? Yes. Yeah. Right. Well, it was a great thermal day. 6,000 feet, and it's going to be Q too. I then looked at the sounding for Charlottesville. What a beauty! This one's critical because we have to get back now. We're a long way downwind in Charlottesville. But when I took one look at this sounding, it's probably going to be blue, but not necessarily. But who cares? I mean, it's almost 7,000 feet. As soon as I saw that, I called John Bird and I said, "We're on," and indeed we were. It was.
Richard, can you share why
you're saying 7,000, what's your interpretation here on that? Oh, sure. So, take a line from the surface here, parallel to these curvy lines, then move it up, and see where the dot is now? Yeah. So that's about, I don't know, 800, 750 millibars, so it's like 9,000 feet. So that was going to allow us to get back. I mean, you don't really care if it's blue or not. And the Roanoke was pretty good. And as it turned out, in fact, just as we were turning at Charlottesville, setting on upwind to get back, Carl got on the radio and said they had Q at 8,000 feet. So it was a nice flight from then on. Okay, well, those are the things I do. As I said, I didn't have time to go into details, but I encourage anybody who's interested to, first of all, learn about SKU-T diagrams, which you can do with the, I provided, here's the references, and the one there says R. Kellerman on thermodynamic diagrams. That's a link to an article I produced years ago that'll make it, you'll totally understand them, it's easy. If you want the KML file for the ridge taps, email me, I'll send it to you. And those are the rest of the data that you can pursue. So, questions?
Richard, I have two questions.
Well, stand up so they can hear you.
Sure. One's a leading question, another one is a trailing question. The first question is, I mean, now you talked about some really sophisticated things and sophisticated weather, but then there's a lot of things that are, you know, simple and such, and not getting into that, but how often do you have to look at whatever models of choice, you know, and I mean, and I'm talking about for all soaring, in order to really become reasonably proficient at understanding weather? And that's a leading question because I think you as a weatherman will have a pretty distinct answer to
Well,
that.
you mean how many hours do you have to invest?
No, as in like how, like, do you look at this on a monthly basis or before a flight? Do you look at this
Oh
every
no,
day?
I would get up in the morning, I read the New York Times, I'm a liberal, and
That'll start your day off wrong.
I check my email, and then I look at the weather. And if it looks, during the soaring season, if it looks plausible, I'll look more at the weather. And if it continues to, I'll start to make a formal forecast. So it's a lot of time is the answer.
And the answer for me is every day.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's-
you're right. I mean, it's almost every day. I mean, as I said about that weather vane, if the wind's coming out of the northwest quadrant and it's not raining, you can probably soar. Okay, what was the next question?
The second question is kind of what we were talking about earlier, and this kind of is how many times have you fallen off the ridge?
Oh, well, I was going to ask Carl that question because I've done a good deal of ridge flying. I have never had to have a forced landing in a field. Not one. Now, I'm pretty cautious about when the ridge weakens, I climb the hell off it immediately. But in hundreds of hours of ridge flying, I've just never done an emergency landing. And I wanted to ask Carl how he did it, and did he always have fields inside? And in fact, he said something. What did he say? That the hell with it, I'm going 100 knots. He's probably right.
Yeah, got a comment, Richard.
Yeah. Oh, there he is.
Talking about falling, we've landed off-field once down south of Rawlings, down south of Cumberland, and we got on the field, okay, I think it was both Roy and I were there, and my Cessna 180 came down to tow us back out. There was a big enough field, but there's a big tree at the end of this, that monster tree, and boy, I don't know, and the farmer had come out by then. And I said, boy, I don't know if we get over that tree or not. I mean, it's kind of a safety hazard. He says, wait a second, gets in his Jeep, drives back to his house, gets a chainsaw. He sawed down a 100-year-old oak tree.
Was his name Chip?
I remember that one of the first times I flew at Newcastle, they sent us on the ridge vision down to Taswell. And there's a long stretch of ridge there where there's just nowhere to land, period. And I was relatively new to the game, and I dutifully slowed to 60 knots and got high. I don't know why, it doesn't make any difference. It's still crash in the trees, it's 60 knots. And I saw people below me going faster, and I suddenly realized, you know, what the hell, it doesn't matter. 60, 100, there's nowhere to land. Just get it over with quickly. So Any other questions? Yeah.
Just one.
Yeah.
No, not for me. It's just saying
time for one more question.
Time for one more question.
So Richard, if you said it before, but maybe you could reemphasize it. If you had to pick the ideal ridge day on the three parameters you talked about, ridge top wind, clearance, cloud-based clearance to the ridge, and maximum gusts, what are your sort of comfort parameters?
I think I did say that. So 30 knots on the ridge, maximum. I don't want to see any more. 40 to 45 knots anywhere in the mixed layer. Angle, the closer to 320, the better. I mean, you can tailor the flight. You don't have to fly 1,000 kilometers every time you fly. One of the troubles with ridge forecasting for, whether it's OLC or badge or record flying, you're the weatherman, you're the pilot, and you're the task setter. So you've got a lot of control. So
What about cloud-based?
cloud-based, again, it depends where I'm going, but if I was going anywhere near where Dale was, 5,000 feet. Now you don't need that at the northern end of the ridge, but I don't know, I'm still inclined to say 5,000 feet, because 5,000 feet can easily turn out to be 4,000 feet. It's not an exact science. Okay, I think it's lunchtime.
Indeed. Thanks a million.